Hi, everyone. Hope you had an amazing networking break. I'm JJ Park, and it's genuinely an honor to be here at GamesForum San Francisco. I know conferences can get repetitive. We've all seen slides full of buzzwords and zero oxygen, so I promise to keep it real, grounded, and hopefully useful. I've spent the past 6 years across product marketing and user acquisition for global titles at both AAA publisher and a data-driven startup. In short, I've seen both sides of the industry, the scrappy startup that fights full install one by one, and the AAA publisher that spends millions to own the launch week. And across the years, I've helped design, and scale more than 10 Korean launches. And Korea is special, not just because it's my home market, but because it constantly humbles you. It's the only place where a game can be both a top-grossing phenomenon and a trending controversy at the same time. So today we'll dig into how that paradox works. We'll talk about why Korea behaves differently, how cultural context shape UA, and how you can adapt those lessons for your own global launches. If I do my job right, you'll walk away not just entertained, but with frameworks you can actually use next Monday. Now, before we get into the why, let's ground ourselves with a quick snapshot of the market itself, because the structure of Korea ecosystem already hints at why it behaves so differently. Korea is one of the few mobile markets in the world where Android dominates more than 70% of installs, yet Apple still drives a significant share of in-app revenue. We even have a third-party app store called One Store, unique to Korea, that still commands a loyal base, especially for high-air PPU RPGs and strategy titles. So even before you plan for your creative or your UA channels, you're already dealing with a split ecosystem. Google Play for reach, Apple App Store for relatively premium spenders, and One Store for local trust. That complexity sets the stage for everything else we'll talk about today. So, with that landscape in mind, let's frame the bigger problem. What makes Asian UA so misunderstood, and where Korea fits within that conversation? When people say Asian UA, they usually mean translate your ads and localize your App Store page. But honestly, that's the entry ticket, not the strategy. Launching in Asia is like playing chess on a board that keeps changing shape. The rules shift depending on where you stand. Each market has its own unwritten laws. In Japan, respect and tradition drive engagement. In China, ecosystems like Baidu, Tencent, or Alibaba define discoverability. And in Korea, emotional authenticity and community validation decide whether you live or die. So that's why I often say, success in Korea equals cultural empathy times operational precision. You cannot brute force your way in with ad spend. You need empathy to connect and precision to execute. So here's what this talk will cover today. 1, what makes Korea unpredictable? The cultural and structural friction points. And 2, real campaign lessons, including how we handled an impossible 24-hour KPI. And 3, reusable frameworks, principles you can apply to your own UA pipelines tomorrow. By the end, I want you to have something more concrete than Asia's complicated. Because yes, it is, but it's also incredibly predictable once you know what to look for. So let's start with a real story. One of those projects that aged me a few years and a few weeks. We had one KPI, fill a server with 10,000 players in 24 hours. That's it. No wiggle room, no excuses, just 10,000 people or failure. Now, this was for a mid-core strategy game. Slow onboarding, complex systems, low day one retention. Basically the opposite of what you want for an aggressive acquisition target. But the game had one huge advantage, deep monetization depth. Players who stayed were whales. They didn't spend casually, they invested. Our average revenue per paying user was almost double the benchmark for the genre. So the challenge wasn't finding players, it was finding believers. So we completely re-engineered our launch funnel. We bet on shortening the pre-registration window from the 8 weeks initially suggested by Google, which helped build FOMO through proactive PR releases every time we hit key milestones. And 2, we tested hundreds of creatives, focusing on mastery and pride, not just rewards. And 3, We pre-aligned community teams to turn early adopters into evangelists. When we featured number 1 on App Store at launch, the office erupted. But the bigger win was understanding why it worked. Alignment and anticipation. We didn't just sell a game. We sold belongings. Now, if you've ever launched a game in Korea, you've probably heard of this infamous truck protest. If not, buckle up. Here's how it works. When players think a publisher crossed the line, maybe pay-to-win events, maybe unfair server rewards, they literally rent trucks with LED billboards, drive them to your headquarters, and blast protest messages all day. You'll see lines like, explain your monetization, or why do Japanese players get better loot, looping outside your building. Imagine sitting in a marketing review meeting and hearing a horn outside, yelling your campaign slogan back at you, sarcastically. That's Tuesday in Seoul. But here's the thing. Fairness isn't a feature in Korea. It's oxygen. If you lose perceived fairness, you lose trust. And no UA budget in the world can save you. That's why every serious publisher runs pre-mortem before launch. They align brand, UA, community, and live ops around a single if this, then that contingency map. Something like, if pay-to-win chatter spikes, then release balancing update within 48 hours. If influencer sentiment dips, then amplify developer transparency video. If churn accelerates, push 30% discount bundle or limited time co-op event. So basically, you prepare scenario A, B, and C months in advance. Now, let's talk about something every UA manager argues about: how to pace your budget. In Asia, especially Korea and Taiwan, the go big model dominates. You throw everything you've got into the first 2 weeks. Massive out-of-home ads, celebrity partnership, influencer bursts, and the goal is simple: hit the charts fast. And it works. In Korea, many large launches allocate a significant early share to brand, often a markedly higher proportion than Western soft launch playbooks. Why? Because player psychology here is group-driven. Gamers want to feel like they're part of something big, a winning team, a cultural moment. If you fail to create that moment early, it's nearly impossible to recover later. Contrast that with the West, where we usually see Flywheel model. It's all about efficiency and stability. Small budget at soft launch, gradual ramp up as the algorithm learns, then scale when ROAS stabilizes. It's predictable, it's calm, it's logical. But in Korea or Taiwan, that approach can actually kill your momentum before you start. Think about Diablo Immortal. It had all the early controversy around monetization, but Blizzard doubled down with huge brand campaigns and community events, and it paid off. In Korea, it became one of the top grossing regions outside of the United States. That's the go big model in action. High risk, high reward, emotionally charged, and brutally competitive. So if you're launching in Asia, remember, don't expect slow burn results. Expect a sprint. If you miss the first lap, you'll never catch up to the next train. When people ask, why can't we just apply the same UA playbook globally? And this slide is the answer. Culture completely reshapes player behavior. In Korea, gamers see themselves as part of a community first, players second. They share data, strategy, and even frustrations in real time on message boards like DC Inside and Invent, the most dominant gamer communities in the region. When something feels unfair, like Japan server getting better rewards, it explodes. And the backlash doesn't stay online. That's where the now famous truck protests come in. Again, literal trucks parked in front of your HQ with banners saying, explain your monetization, treat Korean users equally. And sometimes it's a horse carriage, not a truck. It sounds extreme, but it's a testament that how emotionally invested the players are. You can't just patch that with UA spend. You need cross-functional alignment before you even launch. For example, brand needs a transparent messaging plan. Community needs direct channels for feedback. UA needs flexible creative pipelines in case sentiment shifts. And here's the twist. The same community that sends protest trucks, if you respond well with respect and clarity, they will send coffee trucks next year to thank your team. That's the beauty of this market. It's intense, but it's loyal. Now, let's talk about the most chaotic part of any UA manager's life, ad networks. In Korea, you've got major networks like Kakao or One Store. In China, it's QQ or Bilibili. Then you still have your global heavyweights, Google, Apple, Meta, Unity, ironSource. Each one operates differently with its own quirks, reporting delays, and pricing logic. Local networks often pitch flashy takeover packages like, let's dominate KakaoTalk masthead for the launch day, but you might get little performance data in return. Meanwhile, your global campaigns are tanking and your daily CPI report is due in 3 hours. That's when you start praying to the DSP gods. If you've built relationships early, you'll have a few local partners you can call and say, hey, I need 10,000 installs by midnight. Can you deliver? And sometimes, surprisingly, they can fill up the gap. So one lesson I learned the hard way: map your local network contacts months before launch, not the day before you need them. And always prepare if this, then that trigger plans for optimization. For example, if your CPI doubles overnight on Meta and there's no great performing ad set to save your day, try pausing that global campaign and fire local DSPs for a quick burst. If local CTR crashes after day 3, try rotating creatives that lean on humor or pop culture memes instead. If community sentiment drops around pay-to-win mechanics, try launching a goodwill giveaway with a locally famous influencer or re-emphasize your brand's unique selling point. This is what I call contingency-driven UA. It's not about gambling, it's about preparation. I strongly recommend mapping local partners early and pre-agreeing on performance definitions and attribution windows to avoid post-hoc data disputes during launch. For example, start by clearly defining what CPI actually means in your joint reports and align on whether your local partners is referring to CPI or eCPI. Because in some cases, brand presence is so important in Korea, local teams calculate performance by including organic uplift from brand campaigns, while global UA teams focus strictly on paid-only attribution. That small misalignment can lead to major confusion when you're trying to reconcile dashboard under pressure. Another huge misconception: localization is not just about text or language. It's about cultural empathy and creative intuition. In the West, humor tends to be sarcastic or self-deprecating. In Korea or Japan, humor often comes with timing, wordplay, or shared in jokes from local pop culture. If your ad copy tries to sound cool in English and you translate it literally, it's going to fall flat. I've seen campaigns where English headline says, "Conquer the world," but the Korean translation came up as something like, "Take over humanity." Same meaning in theory, but emotionally completely different. So to localize well, you need creative testing pipelines that are region-specific. For one campaign, we produced over 200 ad creatives before launch. Some in-game hero videos, some meme-style statics, some celebrity content. We found that humor-driven ads could nearly double the CTR compared to cool but serious CGI trailers in Korea. And that data changed our entire rollout plan. And localization also applies to channel strategy. In Korea, locally dominant platforms such as Naver blogs or KakaoTalk communities penetrate far deeper than public relation placements in the United States. A single Naver blog post from a respected gaming writer can outperform a full PR rush in Western media. These micro ecosystems spread virally through personal trust, not corporate visibility. And that's where word of mouth really scales. So, speaking of word of mouth, why does the go big model work so well in Korea? Because group identity comes before individual discovery. In the West, a player might stumble upon a game, try it, and then join a Discord or subreddit. In Korea, it's the opposite. People join a guild or Kakao group first, then play the game because their group decided to. That means your brand campaign isn't just advertising. It's social permission. It signals this is the tribe to belong to. If you fail to create that emotional trigger early, the assumption isn't that your marketing is weak, it's that your game isn't worth joining. I've seen publishers spend millions in that first week, and it's not vanity, it's acceleration. Once you reach critical mass, social proof becomes your algorithm. CPI drops naturally because players start recruiting each other. In a market where reputation spreads through tight communities, one viral meme can outperform an entire UA burst. So when you hear go big, think of it as go belong. Now, compare that to the flywheel model that dominates Western UA. It's patient, it's algorithmic. You ramp spend slowly, feed machine learning loops, and scale only ROAS when ROAS stabilizes. You ramp up. The philosophy is test, learn, iterate, and repeat. It works beautifully in ecosystems like the United States or UK, where player life cycles are long, attribution data is rich, and audiences are broad. It's a marathon model built for endurance. But if you take that same playbook to Korea or even Taiwan, you'll be late before you even start. The first 1 to 2 weeks after launch are everything. That's when player decides which tribe they will belong to. And once they've joined one, turn to a new game is rare. In other words, while Western marketers wait for the machine to learn, Asian competitors are already owning the conversation. Your algorithm might optimize perfectly for a community that's already moved on. To really understand this mindset of Korea, you need to rewind to the early 2010s. Back then, Kakao Games completely dominated Korea's mobile publishing scene by leveraging social networks and referral systems. To overcome that domination, AAA mobile publishers started to launching their major titles with subway station takeovers, celebrity ads, full screen out of home across Seoul. That decade hardwired both developers and players to expect spectacle. If a new game didn't market big, players assumed it simply wasn't big, and that expectation stuck. It became an industry norm. So when a Western UA managers look at a Korean budget and says, hey, why is a week one spend so heavy? Because early cultural legitimacy signals are still decisive in many categories. If you don't fill the street, someone else will. Even now, players subconsciously measure legitimacy by noise law. Quick launches feel suspicious. Loud ones feel trustworthy. And this brings us to the hardest part, global rollout. How do you take one title and make it resonate in markets that live by opposite rhythms? You can't copy and paste budgets or pacing. You have to localize the launch tempo itself. So think of it like agriculture. Different climates, different harvest cycles. In the West, you grow grapes, patient crops that take years of pruning and care before yielding a lasting vintage. Steady data, iterative optimization, predictable returns. In Asia, you sow rice, fast harvest crops that demand heavy upfront investment, explosive early yields, and then meticulous sustain. Both can feed your business, but only if you respect the soil that grew in. The smartest global publishers I've seen treat each region like its own ecosystem. They plan content cadences, creative rotations, and retention campaigns according to local player metabolism, not corporate calendars. Before we lock in a global UA plan, try to ask, are we optimizing for algorithmic efficiency or social belongings? Because in some markets, those two are the same thing. Now, let's zoom out a bit. After years of running UA across different regions, I started using one simple framework, a 2x2 matrix I first learned from my mentor, Eric O, who managed global launches like Overwatch. On one axis, you have time rich versus time poor. And on the other, cash rich versus cash poor. Every player lives somewhere in this grid. Students with all the time in the world but no credit card balance, that's time rich, cash poor. Busy professionals with disposable income but no hours left in the day, that's time poor, cash rich. And the truth is, players rarely move between quadrants overnight. A college kid grinding Genshin Impact 8 hours a day doesn't suddenly become a whale the moment they get their first job. Likewise, a senior executive spending hundreds every month on last word survival game won't magically find extra playtime next month. So when you're building UA messaging, targeting, or creative tone, don't just localize language, localize lifestyle, because time and cash are the real languages of your audience. And let's make that real. Take Clash of Clans. It's bright, humorous, and instantly readable. The kind of game that says, come in, no pressure. It mostly attracts time-rich, cash-poor players, younger audiences who love mastery, progress, and social bragging rights. Retention is fantastic, but ARPPU? Fairly modest. That's okay. Volume is the game. Now look at Rise of Kingdoms. On the surface, it looks similar. Same cartoon style, same top-down strategy loop, but under the hood, it's a completely different machine. It's tuned for time-poor, cash-rich players. 30-something professionals who can't afford to grind 8 hours a day, but can afford to drop a few $100s to stay competitive in alliance wars. Their retention curve is shallower, but their ARPPU skyrockets. So while Clash of Clans wins by scale, Rise of Kingdoms wins by yield. So understanding these audience quadrants tells you where to spend, what to say, and how to measure success. And here's a quick mental check I use. If your top funnel creatives are all shouting play free, but your product's survival depends on $300 in-app bundles, you're probably speaking to the wrong quadrant. So a lot of UA managers, especially in Asia, joke that UA is gambling. You place a bet, pray the algorithm smiles, and check CPI in the morning. I disagree. To me, UA is like farming. You plant seeds, creative hypothesis, audience testings, influencer collaborations, and then you wait. Sometimes a week, sometimes two, before you see what sprouts. If your soil is good, meaning your market fit, timing, and creative messaging, those seeds grow. If it's wrong, no fertilizer in the world will fix it. Think of it like this. If you try planting apples in a coffee plantation, it doesn't matter how good your campaign manager is, you'll still get bad apples. So our job isn't to gamble, it's to farm intelligently. Pick crops for the climate, like stage plantings, and pre-wire irrigation, which are your budgets, and for heat waves, which will be cost per mil spikes. My grandfather was a fruit seller in post-war Korea. Every season, he sold whatever grew best. Apples in good years, pears in bad ones. That flexibility kept our family alive. And honestly, that's how I see marketing. Every launch year, every market, every audience is a new season. You can't control the weather, but you can choose what you plant. Korea today is one of the most fascinating Seoul in gaming. A mature market with esports roots, internet cafe culture, players who demand excellence but reward authenticity. They're not just potential spenders, they're potential evangelists. If you approach this market with curiosity, humility, and clear strategy, you will earn more than installs. You will earn trust. So thank you, GamesForum, for letting me share a few stories from the field. I hope they help you plan better, grow smarter, and maybe, just maybe, avoid a few protest trucks along the way. All right, I see we actually have 2 minutes left. We covered a lot today, from Go Big brand launches to local networks, to why farming meets gambling when it comes to UA. So if there's anything you'd like me to dig deeper into, campaign pacing, creative localization, or just launch week war stories from Asia, let's keep the conversation going. And if you're shy to ask here, feel free to find me after the session or by the LinkedIn QR code on the bottom right of this slide. I'm happy to exchange DMs, compare campaigns, or even swap a few CPI horror stories. Thank you again for being such an engaged audience, and I hope your next campaign find exactly the right soul to grow in. Okay, that's where I pause. I'll take 1 or 2 questions. If you have any, yes, please.
Hey, this is really cool. it also seems rather expensive. And so how would you shrink some of this down for smaller teams or smaller budgets?
Thank you. Yes, as you said, this slide is mostly focused on AAA launches. That's a great point. Of course, there are many smaller budget launches. But yeah, brand, I would say brand porting is bigger for even lower games that's on top of the chart. So like if, for example, top 10, 20 games focus intensely on brand in the United States, assume like maybe top 50 focus on like brand campaigns in Korea. Hope that answers your question. Thank you. Anybody? Yes, please.
I think you showed the graph chart that about if a game enters in, like, for example, South Korea market, and then we wanted to push for scale at the beginning. Right. But then how do you recommend for games that who wants to end the South Korea market but failed for multiple times? And right now we're already pretty much missing this first launch period, but we're still trying to get good scales and performance out of it. Do you think the strategy still applies the same way, or like is there any different other strategies you would recommend to?
Right, that's a great question. So I think the strategy that is in this slide specifically applies to mostly RPGs or simulation games. So like casual games, for example, like if you're launching Zynga, match 3 style or puzzle game, then strategy should be different because, you have multiple portfolios of casual, hyper casual games and see what sprouts in this region. So that should be more of a flywheel model instead of, AAA, go big brand launch. Does it answer you?
Yeah, thank you. But definitely would love to hear more, maybe offline, about like what's the strategy recommendations for casual titles?
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. I think the time is off. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, JJ. Massive round of